Hello, cult hackers, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Celine, a media graduate with an interest in cults.
And I'm her dad. I'm Stephen. I'm trained as an organisational psychologist these days, but I was raised in a cult, so I have a lot of interest in it. So, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Yeah, so we're coming to the end of season 1 of the podcast.
How many episodes is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure, 270, something like that, getting on for. Quite a long season.
Time.
Yeah.
We've done back-to-back episodes for 3.5 years.
Getting on 4. Yeah.
Getting on 4 years. We've done an episode every single week, and for a period of time, 2 episodes a week. For a very long time. And obviously, you know that we dropped down to the once a week, but we've still never really missed anything. I think maybe 1 week, but there was still something like a 5-minute thing up. I don't think we've missed an upload.
That's right.
And yeah, I think season 1 has to come to a close.
Yeah. So looking at what most people do, most indie podcasts, they do seasons, and
not just indie podcasts, all the ones I listen to, like the big ones.
Yeah.
You know, like the BBC, Wondery. They're all season stuff.
They're all seasons. Yeah, so you might have like a 8 episode season, or a 10 at most. But we've had a 270 episode season as our first season. So basically what we're getting around to saying is that we're going to take a break from the podcast for a while. We're not quite sure how long that break's going to be. It could be about 3 months. It could be longer. I guess it just depends on how we feel. I suppose the reason why I want to take a break is I'm just pretty exhausted, really. And, because I do most of the outside work for the podcast, it kind of makes me laugh.
98% of it, and I get the best. Do you know what I mean? Like, very, because,
well, it is my project, really. So, when I listen to the podcast, at the end of it, they say thank you to the sound engineer, thank you to the assistant sound engineer, thank you to the producer, assistant producer, and they go through this list of people, and I sit there going, yeah, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. So yeah, it's a lot of work, and I think the other factor is, and I know a lot of other podcasters in this sort of space and YouTubers and so on do experience the same thing. You kind of get a bit burnt out by delving into the topic all of the time. You're listening to sometimes quite harrowing stories. You're also, for me, I'm revisiting a lot of feelings and difficult feelings and emotions, and so you don't realize it, but it all kind of builds up, and I feel like it's built up for me anyway, and I just kind of need a break, and hopefully we can come back refreshed and anew. And also it's probably good for the podcast to for us to look at things and think, right, can we change things a bit? Are there any things we could do to make it better? But if you're constantly on that treadmill, you never kind of get a chance to stop and look at it. So yeah, they're the reasons.
Yeah, because I think, obviously when it started, I think it was a really good, and for a long time post it starting, it was a really good thing for you, sort of like you've said before, like you felt like lighter from being able to talk about it, but then it sort of feels like it then starts to go a bit in the opposite direction, and that you don't want to pile it back on again.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yeah, so there's definitely a cathartic element for me, talking about my experiences and then discussing other people's experiences with them, and also getting into the theory of cults and the psychology behind it, which is obviously what Cult Hackers is all about. Really, it's not just looking at the surface; it's also trying to get into the code, how it all works. So I kind of like that, and I found that really interesting. But yeah, there is a point at which the benefits start to um, reduce, and the difficulties, the pain, um, the stress, the mental sort of impact starts to overtake that. So yeah, I think we're at that point. Probably should have done it a bit earlier,
Mm.
but anyway, we're doing it now. And what I would say is, please stay subscribed to the podcast, because we will do something at some point, and we will be back, as a wise man once said. Um, so yeah, don't disappear. We'll be back with something, and it might look a bit different. It might sound a bit different, but I think we'll definitely come back at some point.
Yeah, I think nothing's decided yet as well. So we
Yeah,
want to take some time off where we just don't think about the podcast
that's
at
right.
all. And then we'll, in our own time, personally reconvene and discuss what we want the podcast to look like
Yeah.
going forward. And maybe we'll talk about that with our patrons first, because obviously we do
Mm.
kind of have more of a relationship with the patrons and we actually talk to them. So
Mm.
if you're a patron, then you'll probably know sooner.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Patreon page is still there. So I've suspended um, the membership fees, if you like. But I think you can still join. There is a level of membership that is free anyway. So if you wanted to keep in touch with what's happening, then you could do that. I've also, in an attempt to rescue my sanity, I also deleted my Twitter account, Celine.
Mm-hmm. Which is a big move for you.
It was a big move. It took me 10 years to get 4,000 followers.
Mm-hmm.
But I found that increasingly was Twitter's, or X as it's now called, a pretty unpleasant place. It never was a great place to be, but yeah, I found that it's not a great place to be. And it also means even actually when it's good, I mean, there are some great people on there, I have to say, and I will miss them, because that's the only way that I kind of talk to them. But
Mm-hmm.
so I will miss those people that I admire and really care about. But again, it's being in that space. It's in that headspace. So I'm constantly looking at those tweets and thinking, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that, and oh, that reminds me of this, and oh yes, this. So I thought it's probably right to social media's kind of been getting me down a bit anyway. So I've basically deleted that account. The Cult Hackers Twitter X account is still there, so you can follow us on Cult Hackers. I probably won't be doing any posting on it for a while, but obviously that's a place to look out for whatever we're going to do next. So we'll keep you updated that way. Again, with the Instagram page, probably do the same with that and mothball it, in that won't be really posting on it, but it'll still be there. And when we're ready to let you know about what's happening, then we'll probably do it there as well, because that's quite a popular forum for that. Yeah, so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. But I wanted today not just to be about the last episode for a while. I wanted to talk about a topic, but that was related to the point of this,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole concept of voice, having a voice, my need for a voice, my desire to have a voice, and also the way that other people look to have a voice. I thought that was quite a good topic to finish on. So yeah, that's the theme. Voice is also connected to our identity, or identities, and our sense of self. So it's another one of those topics that has come up over and over again on this podcast, because it is so important when it comes to being in a cult and then leaving. So yeah, that's the topic for today. Voice.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk about why you originally wanted to tell your story then? Because at that point we didn't really have any followers. Obviously now lots of people have heard your story, but
Yeah. So when we first started, I think we've mentioned this before. We always knew that cults was an interesting topic, but we didn't really see this podcast as being specifically about cults.
No.
It was called "What Should I Think About?" dot 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 question mark,
Mhm.
and the idea was really just to explore and investigate all sorts of topics.
Mhm.
Um, Clearly, cults was one of those, but all sorts of other questions that we might talk to each other about. So that wasn't so that was how it started. But at some point, I kind of realised that I did want to talk about my story being raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And in fact, I'd wanted to talk about that for a very, very long time. So I think I've explained how when I first left, I can't speak for other people. When I first left, my first instinct was to say nothing to anybody, to keep quiet. So I concentrated on my career and tried to just pretend that my upbringing had never happened. I wouldn't tell anybody I'd been raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And I was ashamed of it, if I'm honest. Um, and and then there comes a point where you start wanting to tell people, and you might go over the top then and tell everybody about it because you have this need to get it off your chest. And then you realize that people are not that interested. Some are, but most people don't really care that much. And you then stop talking about it and get on with your life again. Um,
Mm.
but I still felt that I'd not really explained it properly. And it's kind of hard to describe why you want to do that, but there is an element. This is what I mean by voice, that you want to have your say. And I think it's connected to the fact that when you're raised in a cult, you don't get to have your say.
Mhm.
You basically have to say what you're told to say. So you're really doing somebody else's saying. Your your messages, the things you're saying, uh, the ideas you're espousing, these are somebody else's ideas, and it's your job to essentially rabbit or repeat um, those things. And so you're robbed of your own authentic voice. Um, and when you leave, also there's an element of you. I felt I wondered what. So people who were still in the organisation, Jehovah's Witnesses, they would have an opinion of why I'd left, and I wanted to explain why I'd left. But it's really hard to explain why you've left, because if you explain why you've left, you're going to get, or you may well get branded as an apostate, because what you're saying is against the organisation. So you're either saying, like I would have done, that it's not true. The prophecies that were made, the interpretations of the Bible, the belief in the Bible as the inerrant word of God. These are things I didn't believe anymore. So if I was going to explain why I'd left because of all that, I would be labelled an apostate. So I had to keep quiet. So I was denied a voice. You end up mumbling something when people ask you. You end up mumbling something like, "Well, I needed some time to think about it, and I'm just blah, blah, blah." And you don't really sound very coherent because you can't. You just can't. You're not allowed to have a voice. You're not allowed to explain why you feel this way. You're not allowed um, to coherently and in detail um, put your side forward. So there's that, and then you also realise that people in the world, that the world into which you're now emerging, they don't really understand it either. So their concept of it is really skewed. They don't really know what it's like being a member of a group like that, and they don't really understand the difficulties of leaving and so on. And so you don't really say very much there. So you're left without a voice, or you feel that you don't have a voice. And so this is one of the reasons why I think so many leavers of these groups find outlets, find a way to have that voice.
Mm.
And I think creativity flourishes from there. So if you think about the people we've spoken to, I'm going to stop talking now because it's turning into a monologue. But yeah, what do you think? Does that make sense?
No, I agree. I think the time when I felt most assured in doing the podcast, where I think maybe we would have taken a break sooner, but I was very um, staunch in carrying on for a period of time because of certain situations where I felt like we were being encouraged to shut up.
Mm, yeah,
I, I, I'd never wanted to do the podcast more.
yeah,
Um, so I think
mm,
because, yeah, there's something about, being told your opinion or your thoughts are this or they're that or
mm,
they're invalid. That's,
yeah,
you want to
yeah,
put that right.
yeah. I think that's a very good point. Yeah, so I think that's the reason why so many people do podcasts or YouTube videos. It's also why people become musicians and artists and filmmakers, and a lot of these projects do have a theme
Hmm.
of this, this thing they've been through.
Hmm.
Um, think about all the people we've interviewed. We've interviewed countless authors who've
Hmm.
told their story in a book. Musicians. I think about Witness Underground and all those guys. And there's lots of others as well that creatively made music, and a lot of the music that they make, relates. The lyrics relate to their experiences. Um, Filmmakers, you
Hmm.
think about the films that have featured that sort of experience. And we've interviewed many of these people, and I think this is just another way of having that voice, the voice that was denied you for so long, this authentic voice that this is what you think, this is what I believe, this
Hmm.
is what I think, and I want to say it. I want to express it in my own way.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely denied you in a cult. It's one of the most damaging things about being in a cult, and especially being raised
Hmm.
in these sorts of coercive environments.
So, obviously, still in the lens of the fact that we're taking a hiatus, kind of how does that play in? Is it that you feel like you've said enough and you'll see if you've
Yeah,
got more to say, or, what is.
yeah. I mean, I think there is an element of that in that, and I think this is what most creators of YouTube and podcast channels tend to find is that you get to a point where you've kind of said it all.
Mhm.
Now, I think we're a bit different in that we interview lots of different people, so
Yeah.
it's not just about my story or your story. It's about all these different people that we meet. So I don't feel like we've run out of people to talk to. I don't feel like we've run out of topics.
Hmm.
Um, but it's there is an element of for now, um, I'm gonna I'm gonna shut up for a bit, and
Hmm.
also I think there's an element here that I want to do a bit more learning and research. So it's not 100% commitment yet because I haven't found an institution yet, but I do still want to do my PhD. So the plan at the moment for me is to find an institution where I can do a PhD on this stuff. But I think I'd find it very, very difficult to do a PhD and keep the podcast going for a number of reasons. And so I think it's probably a good time for me to step back from the podcast a bit to start looking at what
Hmm.
sort of research I can do. I want to go deeper. I want to start, digging into some stuff that we've hinted at. These are areas around identity and so on are areas that I think are really important and are not fully understood, I don't think. And so I'd like to do some work in that area. Um, so yeah, there's that. Um, I might do some writing as well, so I might have a bit of time. This is not in the first month, So the first
Hmm.
month, I think we're just gonna. I
Relax.
want to completely forget about it. I'm gonna get on my bike and I've got my camping gear, and I'm just gonna go and do some camping. I've got some work booked in as well, so I'll have work to do. But yeah, so I'm just gonna do that. But yeah, so maybe yes, and maybe I have said enough for a while. Um, but it's always been about other people's stories, and that's the other thing I did want to say is that I think the beauty of this sort of medium is that we've been able to give an opportunity for other people to have a voice as well.
Hmm.
And we've had 100+ guests on the show, many of whom, just like me and just ordinary people who've had an experience, and they talk about it. But they've really wanted to. So most of the people that we've spoken to have reached out to us. Um, so that says something. That tells you something, doesn't it?
Hmm. Yeah, wanted to share your story. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
they really wanted to, and I'm very touched that they wanted to come on our show to
mhm.
to tell it, and that's great. So some of those people were um, writing books, or had written books, or had their own podcasts and things that they wanted to sort of spread the word about. But others just wanted to tell their story. I think
Yeah.
about some of the people that contacted you, and
Hmm.
we just spoke to them because they wanted to tell their story, and
Yeah.
that's really, really important. So having a voice is so important.
Yeah. We covered, yeah, why you wanted to talk, why you now want to have a little break. um. Yeah. What? Yeah. How that all links in with the grand themes.
But I also wanted to talk, and so I didn't want this episode to just be about um, our rest period. So I've done a bit of research, Celine. I've got back into my psychology books.
I see.
So I've gone back to my security blanket, which is
Hmm.
my psychology books.
Yeah.
But I was really trying to find stuff around why it is that people need to have a voice. And if you think about
Hmm.
um, anybody that's been through something, you think about people who've experienced terrible racism, or um, experienced assault through the Me Too, or being exposed through the Me Too movement as well. A lot of that is about people standing up and saying, "Look, I've fed up with this, and I want to say something. I want to have a voice. I want to explain what's happened to me."
Yeah.
Um, and that's a really important thing. I was sort of thinking, why is that? Why do human beings want to do that after they've experienced something that is pretty awful? They want to talk about it. They want to share it with as many people as they can. And so I got looking in my textbooks, and there's a book I've used before, which I'll reference again. It's the Handbook of Self and Identity, edited by Mark R. Leary and June Price Tangney. And it's actually one of those books that lots of different academics have contributed their own research. So it's a great book to go to as a reference. But I've gone back to my favourite theoretical structure, which is the one that I think I'm going to do some research using, which is called self-determination theory. Um, so I thought I'd talk a bit about that, because that absolutely relates to why we need voice, and why identity is linked to this.
Mhm.
So do you remember we did the ABC?
Yeah. Quite recent.
These are basic psychological needs. So
Mm.
fundamental psychological needs are a need for autonomy, belongingness, which is actually called relatedness in the model, but that
Yeah.
doesn't work with ABC, and C, which is competence. So basically, human beings have these basic psychological needs of a sense of autonomy, a sense of
Yeah.
belonging,
Because
and a
you said
sense of
this was better than
competence.
like the Maslow thing, basically.
Well, yeah, it's definitely more work being done on this. There's lots of
Mm.
research that's used this sort of model. So yeah, these are what they call intrinsic motivators.
Hmm.
So these are things that we really need, and because they are such motivators, that drives our behaviour. And identity formation, or identities formation, I'll explain that in a minute, is one of the ways that we can get these three things.
Yeah.
So basically, what this theory says is that we have a need to build identity or identities. And we shouldn't think about identity as being a single thing. Basically, we have multiple identities. So, I'm a father, um, I'm a management trainer, I'm a podcaster. These are all identities that I have about myself. But the reason for these being formed is it's a natural process, but essentially they are this formation of identities is fulfilling these three psychological needs. So
Mhm.
it's all about these three psychological needs. And the primary of those is belongingness. So this relatedness, this feeling that you are belonging to something. And I think this is really interesting because we live in a world now that is kind of obsessed about identity. I think we
Yeah.
talk about identity, and identity is much more than we used to do.
Mhm.
It is a topic now of conversation constantly, and but it's still, and of course, because we have social media,
Yeah.
um, everybody is now enacting. So what this theory says is essentially we enact an identity. So we perform an
Yeah.
identity. We do that to again fulfill these psychological needs.
Mhm.
Um, Often these are, when it's healthy, these identities that we start to develop as we're children and then into adolescence. A lot of these identities will come from the things that we like doing or that we're
Mhm.
competent at. So, I used to love playing football, soccer. So I would think of myself as a football player. Um, I wasn't a professional football player, but I would see myself in that way. Um, and so, but that was because I enjoyed doing it. I was quite good at it. Therefore, it was part of who I was. So it was really integrated into my own psyche, my own personality. It was part of who I am.
Mhm.
But as we go through life, there are lots of other identities that are offered to us in the world, and we have to choose some of those, but others get chosen for us. So, and that's because society imposes kind of norms upon us.
Mhm.
So, most of us will think of ourselves as a member of a family in some way or another, a father, mother, sister, daughter, son, whatever. And you'll have that as an identity that is essentially placed upon you by society. We'll go to work, we'll become a project manager, become a salesperson, become a management consultant.
Mhm.
Again, these are identities that are kind of available to us, and we take them up sometimes for convenience sake, because you want to be able to earn a living. So in order to earn a living, you have to have an identity as some sort of work that you're doing, and other times it's really part of who you are. But the primary reason for identity creation is this sense of belonging, this need, psychological need for relatedness.
Mhm.
And I think that's really interesting because when you think about the way that our society is um, kind of creating these silos where people are attaching themselves to movements or to identities or to labels, um, a big reason for that, I think, is this need for feeling that you're belonging to something, you are part of something, you are related to something.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's quite interesting. So there's this need for relatedness, and of course, religions and cults are really, that's kind of their best thing.
Mm.
That's what they're really good at,
Yeah.
is this sense of belonging.
Mhm.
So if cults are good for anything, it's good for a sense of belonging,
Mhm.
and so that's very much a part of who you are. I was a Jehovah's Witness. I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and we'd have that song that we'd sing. We're Jehovah's Witnesses. We speak out in fearlessness. This was who I was. Big part of or it was an identity that I had. And then when you're leaving, then you've obviously that identity. You're leaving that identity behind, and then you've got another choice of identities. So you can be an apostate. That's another one that's offered to you.
Yeah.
You can be an activist. You can be just somebody that's fallen away. You can be an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And all of these are ways or you've got a choice as to these identities. And I think this is one of the reasons why people want to talk, because it's a way for them to essentially form and inform other people about their chosen identities. This is now who I am. And people will choose slightly different ones. I've never chosen the activist identity. I don't really feel like I'm an activist.
No.
I don't want to be an activist. But some people do. And so they want to say that. So I think that's one of the reasons why people want to talk. It's having that voice to be able to enact this new identity that we're now trying to develop. So that's one of them. The see the competence bit, I think, is a really important bit as well. So in order to have an identity, you want that identity to be connected to something that you're at least decent at. So I don't know whether you have an identity, Celine. If I said to you, you're a really great tennis player, and I really want you to be a tennis player. That's what I want for you. That's what I want for my daughter to be, a tennis player. Now, if I'd have been like that as a father, sort of trying to encourage you to be the next Serena Williams, how would you have experienced that?
Well, it just wasn't happening, was it? I was not destined to be an athlete. I don't think that was ever in the cards. But I mean, even with things that you are good at, if you just don't want it, you just don't want it, So like I was decent at singing, and you'd always be like, why are you not pursuing the singing, going to bars and stuff? And I was like, I literally don't want to. I like doing it in the capacity I do it, and that is enough. And it was just irksome, to be honest. TBH. Irksome. Umbrage all over the place.
Irksome.
Yeah.
That's a great. We've not used that word yet in the podcast, so congratulations.
Yeah.
So that's the point. If I don't think we were ever pushy parents, but some parents are very pushy, and if we'd have said, look, you really need to use this gift. This is a gift. You've really got to use this gift. That you've got this wonderful voice. You've got to do it, and force you to go to singing lessons, even though you didn't want to. Forced you to learn to play a musical instrument and learn to read music and all of that. So what happens then, according to this self-determination theory, is you're forced, if you like, to take on this identity that you don't really have, or that you don't want, but you take it on because it's being expected of you. It's being forced on you. And this is where that word introjects comes in, or you introject it. So it becomes part of you, but it's not really part of how you see yourself, or your true self, if you like. So this is what I like about this theoretical structure, is that it does differentiate between the word self and identity. So, and I think this makes perfect sense. So the self is the thing that we describe it's how we describe ourselves. It's how we think about ourselves. Identities, though, are multiple, and we can put them on, we can choose them, and we can discard them at any time. So this sense of self, this sense of who I am, when that's not aligned to, when the identities that we have are not aligned to our sense of who we really are, And that's when, again, we have this inauthentic feeling. And I think a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses feel that just before they leave. So, you have this sense that I am a Jehovah's Witness, I am an elder, I am a ministerial servant, I am a pioneer. These are all identities within the organisation, but you don't feel that that's authentically you. Maybe you don't really believe it, maybe you just don't want to live that life. And that's the struggle that you go through before you leave. You have this battle within yourself. And so it's this striving for your identity to match your sense of yourself, of who you really are, is what causes you to leave. And then you have this difficult time where you're trying to now find new identities. As I say, some people will do that through YouTube or through podcasts or whatever they choose to do. Others will do it through putting themselves into work or family or whatever. Okay, so just going back to these three things, a sense of autonomy, belonging, and competence. So competence is linked to this feeling that we actually can do something and it's part of who we are. And then the autonomy bit that we haven't covered yet. That's when you are authentic. This is when you are the person you really feel you are. Your identities align to your sense of self, to who you really are. And I think for leavers like me, but also for perhaps more so for new leavers, if you've just come out like a year ago or so on, then I think that's really difficult in the environment you're in now. Because you're going from an organisation that told you what your identities were, and compliance was really what it was all about, and you are thrown into a world that is quite chaotic, and there's more talk about identity than there ever has been. There's more angst surrounding identity and being part of a tribe, being part of a group. And I think that's really difficult.
Yeah, I suppose as well, something that I don't know how this fits in with what you've looked at, so you tell me, but talking about authenticity as well. I think the thing is as well, like wanting to change your identity, and you can do that by choice, can't you? And it can be authentic because yeah, I am currently working on being less passive, or the opposite of passive assertive, I suppose. I'm working on assertiveness, but in my like personal life. So I think at work I'm assertive, but in my personal life I'm very passive because I'm conflict avoidant. So I'd rather just be passive because it's path of least resistance, isn't it? But obviously I feel like, yeah, that is quite key to my identity, but I don't want to think that that can't go away. And that you're not saying that, are you?
That's quite interesting because that's slightly different. So it's when you label it, I suppose, it becomes an identity.
Yeah.
Um,
So if I say I'm a passive person, you say,
that's right.
and I've
Yeah.
identified it as like I'm a passive person, I don't like it.
Yeah. So when I'm training, because I train people in assertive behaviour, that's part of my leadership program that I run with businesses. And what I try to get managers to think about is not to label themselves or other people. So one of the things that you could say to somebody is, you're too aggressive, which is labeling them with this.
Or when you're talking about yourself, if you're coming out of the thing, coming out.
So I'm too passive. Rather than saying that, you'd be better saying, I behave in a passive way more than I'd like.
Yeah.
So instead of you labeling yourself and creating this identity for yourself as Miss Passive, You are just saying that I behave in lots of different ways, but sometimes I behave passively. And
Mm.
if I count up how many times I behave passively, that's more than I would like. I would like to reduce the amount of times I am a pushover. Yeah.
Mm.
And so that's really what it becomes. It becomes about behaviour rather than
Yeah.
identity. So that's what I would. That's the way I would get around that.
Mm.
What you're really talking about here are behavioural patterns as
Right.
opposed to identities as such. But they get mixed in together because the way we talk, in the English language, we possess certain qualities and we then say
Yeah.
we are that thing.
Yeah. It probably also doesn't help because apparently I'm quite mean to myself, so that's probably also why.
Hard on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So working on it. But yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's good to know that to be authentic does not mean you have to live with things that you're not happy about.
absolutely. No, that's
Yeah.
right. The very fact, if you're not happy with it, then that in itself tells you that to be your authentic you, if you like, then um, it's fine to change your behaviour. But that's what you're talking about. You're talking about
Yeah.
changing your behaviour as opposed to having a different identity. That would be my take on that. Um, and that's more accurate, really, because we do tend to do things, but we don't always do them. So even the most passive person
Mm-hmm.
will at times say no.
Yeah.
So does that now suddenly make them not a passive person
Mm.
when 5 minutes ago they were? So it's a bit of it's not a very accurate way of
Mm-hmm.
labeling an identity anyway, is to sort of concentrate on the
Measuring
behaviour.
behavior.
Yeah, so you'd be better just saying, these are my behaviours. This is what I tend to do
Mm-hmm.
more than I'd like. I want to
Mm-hmm.
reduce the amount of times I do that. That's how I try to think anyway.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'll probably leave the psychology there, but I think for me the reason I got into that was because it really did relate to this need for a voice, the the enacting, the speaking, the explaining on a podcast or on a YouTube channel is part of that process. I think it's part of what you're doing. Not everybody does that, of course. People do that in different ways, but that's why I think there are so many. And I will say, going back to when we started in 2020, compared to how many people now are talking about this topic, I think it's just mushroomed, isn't it?
Yeah, no, there's loads now. I mean, there's a lot of documentaries, a lot of YouTube channels, a lot of podcasts. So there's just a lot of media in general about cults.
Yeah, the amount of indie podcasts that have started up. I was just speaking to our friend Riley from the Jackson channel, and he's just starting a podcast. So, you know,
You can
your
jump over
your
there for a
slot.
bit.
That's right. The slot that you used to listen to us, jump on and listen to Riley, and he's said, he's asked me to go on as a guest at some point. So I'm sure I'll do that. But yeah, so that'll be exciting. And there's lots of other great content creators out there. I think too many to mention. I'll
Well,
forget somebody
a lot of them have
if I
been
do.
guests on here, so you can find their back
Absolutely.
catalogue, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, and I suppose that's the last thing to say is that we have 270 nearly episodes.
Mm-hmm.
If you are missing us,
Go
then
back.
they'll stay up there. Go back and listen to old versions,
Yeah.
and you can laugh at our earlier attempts. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so there's plenty there for you to catch up on if you want to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything
Cheers
else
to
you want to
season.
say, Celine?
No, I was just gonna say cheers to season one, the longest season of any podcast on any platform. Um, yeah, and yeah, we'll just keep you in the loop. Yeah, I suppose maybe before we come back, if we
Yeah,
still plan on coming back, we're just not sure when. So we'll do maybe like a 1 minute reminder that we're coming back into your feed.
yeah,
Um, and then take it from there.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll probably be summer by the time we come back. Early summer, I should think. So I suppose I just want to say thank you to all our listeners. Thank you so much for listening. Those downloads, I'm going to miss looking at those download
Good
numbers
for you
like
for a
10
bit, though.
times a day.
I think
I've become obsessed with that, so that's going to be really weird not looking at those.
I think it'll be good for you.
Yeah, but thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and also thank you to those guests that we've had. Mm-hmm. Some of those guests I know do listen because they tell us. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being our guest, and thank you to everybody that's been a part of this first season of Cool Hackers. And yeah, have a nice spring. See you in the summer.
Yeah, off we go.
Bye.
Bye.